Rohit Basin, partner at KPMG, as the distinguished moderator for this panel. And with his wealth of experience and expertise in the field, Mr. Basin is well positioned to lead this discussion. Joining him on the panel are an impressive lineup of distinguished speakers who will share their experiences and insights into what it takes to build a unicorn company. So, the panelists include Chirag Gupta, Managing Partner at 8X Ventures, Andrew Uri, Executive Director at Phoenix America Investments, Harish Consul, Founder, President, and CEO of Oakgrow Ventures, Asher Hassan, Co-Founder and Executive Chairman of Doctors, Ian Barkowiak, Founder and President of Ecomverse, Malachi Halliday, CEO and Founder of Halliday Growth, and Vianney Matonet, Partner at Africa Modus Focus Fund. So, after the panel, we will be concluding day 2 of this conference. So, Mr. Basin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, everyone. Can I request my eminent panel to please join me on the stage?
Is there
no order. We can follow the order. You know, we are the disruptors, especially from the session. Feel free, comfortable. And of course, Chirag, we have a different photo. Chirag's look different in the real life than the photograph.
For once.
Oh.
He just rearranged all of us.
On the right side here.
Different one. I confused all of us.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening. An evening with the topic, which is unicorns. It couldn't be better than this. Small tip for my panelists, you have to bring this mic closer. This is my 4th panel since yesterday, so I have become slightly expert. Little high pitch would make the audience listen better. There'll always be an echo. Sometimes you will hear music coming from the other side, but we are the hustlers, so we know how to manage all these situations. Thank you, everyone. Unicorns is an interesting topic for all of us, and what could be better, especially when we are currently in a massive shift of the unicorn ecosystem. We are talking about nearly 550 unicorns currently being mapped in a system by some agencies, but there is a significant downturn, I would say, or a disruption age we are currently seeing. We are talking about almost a 35% drop of funding from 22 to 21. We are talking about deal size also dropping by 32% as compared to 21 versus 22. We are also talking about a drop of IPO ratio by nearly 31%. That's the macro data I'm talking about. But at the same time, some of the developing economies are really doing well. US-based companies account for just under half of the overall funding of the deals, which means the remaining half is moving to the emerging economies. And I interestingly noticed some of these economies in Africa, South Africa, Nigeria, they are picking up the real deal when it comes to the funding movement happening. But what's changing? We all know artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence. We also have seen the flavor in some time back was metaverse. Now it's moving to AI, chat GPT. I don't think so anybody have ignored this word. But this is a very interesting time when we expect another level of disruption happening. And today I have with me the most beautiful panel I could think of, and thanks to AIM for putting together this such an interesting panel of diverse speakers ranging from entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, to investors from different parts, emerging economy, developed economy. So let me invite my colleague Chirag. Chirag Gupta is a managing partner with 8X Ventures, specializing in deep tech. Chirag has, of course, currently been an active investor in disruptive technology, but has been initially involved in some of these enterprises such as 500 Global, you must have heard about Kareem, the very own local unicorn, McKinsey, Pricewaterhouse, and many more. He has partnered with over 8 governments during in his early days, and Chirag has graduated from University of Chicago, Booth and Nanyang Business School. Welcome, Chirag. Thank you for my overwhelming response from my panelists, and little energy from the team will also really help us. I have with me Harish Council. Harish is the founder and CEO of Oak Grove Venture, based out of Calgary. While his location is technically Calgary, but he has been active investors in different parts of economy, and especially the region from where I am, India. And he has been active investors for nearly 3.5 decades, is what I understand. And some of his investments, most of you have heard about, including Amazon, Shopify, Hellogen, Viom, Fates, Garuda, and many more. Welcome, Harish.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have with us a young entrepreneur, Jean. Jean is a student, by the way, which I realized when I was talking to him. And he is the founder and the president of Econverse, a NGO based out of Poland. And his passion is creating student entrepreneur. This is where I'm going to stop because there's a lot more to his profile, but this is the spotlight, someone really working with students. And he has already mentored 500 students to become an entrepreneur. Welcome. I have Malachi Halliday, CEO and founder of Halliday Growth. Sir Malachi Halliday is currently heading the Halliday Growth, which is a leading provider of working capital for startups. Of course, startups is his passion, but he does invest in the small and medium enterprises, ranging from a ticket for 50,000 to 500,000 dirhams. So please know if you know whom to pitch for, you have the right person with you. Of course, he has a lot of claim to fame, but I will immediately jump in terms of bringing other panelists. Welcome, Malachi, please. I have another interesting friend of ours, Vinay Mathunet, partner Africa, Modus Capital. So again, looking at the different market, we are talking about Vinay coming from Africa, and he's a general partner with Modus Capital with over a decade of active experience in the asset management, private equity, and especially in the VC space. He specializes in the MENA region. That's where his maximum time goes in. Welcome, Vinay. Thank you. I have another interesting panel member with me, Andrew Urey, managing partner of Phoenix America Capital Investment. Andrew has been international financial experience with experience in the space of investment banking, energy, infrastructure. He obtained his management degree at American Intercontinental University and has spearheaded several fundraising and marketing campaigns over his past 2 and 3.5 years of decades. He has been a partner at Phoenix American Capital and has been active investors in the space of renewable energy, fintech, biotech, agritech, and edtech. Sorry. Welcome, Andrew. Now, this is again another twist to the panel, the kind of composition which we have been able to put together. I have Dr. Asher Hassan. When I was trying to understand about Asher, he has an impressive academic background, a medical degree from Harvard Medical School, an MBA from NYU Stern School of Business. So in spite of having his fabulous career, Asher himself ventured out to create his own, I would use the word social enterprise, Naya Jeevan. Naya Jeevan in Hindi, in Indian language, it's called as New Life, which is basically to provide a health insurance and wellness plan to informal and formal workers in the corporate value chain, which is pretty interesting space. And his another venture, DocHer, is a digital health venture that matches the underutilized capacity of female doctors. So welcome, my friend. So, Let me start with Chirag. Chirag, deep tech has been your, I would say, the first love in terms of investing. And there's a lot happening in deep tech while AI is coming as a headwind from other side. How do you see the ecosystem unfolding and what's changing as we see?
Does it work? Does it work now? Yes. I know there's been a lot of buzz around the AI that has been there, especially thanks to ChatGPT, and it has suddenly become popular. Everyone is talking about what's happening in the deep tech, in the AI space. But there has been a lot happening in the robotic space which has not been talked about. There's a lot happening in the metaverse. There's a lot happening in AR, VR, cryptocurrency, blockchain, Web3 0.0. There's a lot of things happening in those areas. Let's talk about industrial IoT. There's a lot of things happening in the industrial IoT space on how the entire manufacturing space will look like, which has not been talked about. What we actively look out for are the areas, not the ones which are the buzzwords of the day, which is the AI right now, or the ChatGPT of the word, and metaverse in 2021, AR, VR in 2020. So we try to stay away from the buzzwords and focus on the real grounded problem statements. And if you look at the grounded problem statements, there are 4 areas which are massively transforming right now when it comes to the deep tech or the industries. First area is the water wash segment, which is water sanitation segment. Second segment is the industrial IoT, which is changing the entire manufacturing space. Third is the future of computing, which includes semiconductor, photonics, cybersecurity. And fourth area is the biotech, which includes molecular diagnostic, genomics, personalized medicine, those areas. These areas are truly transforming how the world will look like, and that's where we believe is the future of deep tech lies at.
Thank you. Thank you, Chirag. Pretty interesting. Just to reiterate, you're talking about the next wave coming in the space of WASH, which is water, the industrial IoT, the elements of the future of computing, especially SEMCON, and biotech. That's interesting. Thank you, Chirag. Harish, I know you have been instrumental in grooming, mentoring startups, and some of your investing companies have become unicorns. So help us understand that the mentality with which someone set up a enterprise, which we call it as startup, from there to becoming a unicorn, what's the difference?
Sure. Thanks, Mohit. First of all, it's great to be here. Amazing warm welcome in Abu Dhabi. So very briefly, so Acro Ventures, we've been investing over 30 years in Canada and globally now. Fortunate to be an early investor in Amazon in the mid-90s, and then Shopify and several others globally now. So we look at what are the main, like you said, unicorns are a very, very special breed of company. You know, there's millions of companies in the world, startups every week, but there's only 1,200 unicorns around the world. That's it. So can everybody hear me? So 1,200 is less than 1% of the amount of companies that come to that stage. So what's so special about unicorns? So we look at 5 main traits of unicorns, and all 5 have to be in place. So one is obviously the idea. Is it a new business idea? Is it a similar one rehatched? 2 is the founding team, the people around the founding company. 3 is the revenue model of the company. What's the path to profitability? Are they generating income, profitable growth right now? 4 is timing. What's the timing of the market? Are they too early? Are they too late? And 5 is funding. They've got to be well capitalized. They've got to be able to grow with scale, debt, equity, and so on. So of those 5, they're all very, very important. And let me just share, if I can, a quick example so everyone understands. So let's just pick one, pick timing. So I think everybody remembers in the late 90s, there was a lot of companies doing video streaming, and everyone wanted to deliver content over the internet. And every single company failed. So why? We didn't have broadband adoption. So it wasn't over 50%. The internet connection we had was dial-up. It was very slow. Some people had high speed, but it was less than 20% of the market. Only 5 years later, the vast majority of the population had high-speed internet. Broadband became 50% adoption, and huge companies were born. Google's YouTube, Netflix, Amazon Prime. It was literally the same idea 5 years later. So timing is really, really important. You know, you don't want to be too early, and we look at all of those 5 traits.
Thank you, Harish. So the startups who are pitching outside now know the tips of 4 elements which you really need to be careful when you're talking to Harish, especially the idea, team, your revenue model, and timing. Of course, funding will follow after that. It's not easy. It's not difficult, I would rather say, especially when you have so many investors sitting here. John, student entrepreneurship. So I have the privilege of working in India. We run Startup India for government, wherein we deal with graduates, postgraduates, or ex-employees, right? Talk us through what is the kind of ingredient you put in the mind of a child, I would say, who is studying, and how can you really turn his or her mindset from a job seeker to a job creator?
Yeah, so I think that the most important thing is changing the development into more interactive and more practical. Because nowadays education is still based on theoretical systems, often based on the Prussian model of Bismarck from the late 19th century, and children really don't like it. With how the world is changing right now in terms of social media and other patterns that influence their behavior, the current models of learning are not the most effective. And amidst the development of artificial intelligence, which will create additional challenges for the generations that will enter the market in 5 or 10 years, growing entrepreneurship and soft skills is becoming particularly important. So how we do it is we create a form of a gamified format where the teens, for the duration of 4 weeks, experience what it's like to become an entrepreneur. And in order to participate in the event, they don't need to know anybody, but they are connected to other teens who are interested in a given field, to mentors, and then they, through the workshops and the ideation process with the mentor, develop their own idea and pitch it in front of jury, competing for awards. And in our process, we work based on science of learning, which is becoming more important than ever now. So we leverage on emotions, but also learning in different contexts. And we believe that how social sciences are taught has to change fundamentally in the future. And in Econverse, we want to stand on top of that revolution.
Thank you. This has immense opportunity in my mind, especially when the global ecosystem or the mindset towards running a startup is changing, and many countries have started to show results. Thank you so much. Malashi, innovation, disruption is the norm when you run a startup. But eventually it's a business. You have to run a profitable business. How do you balance this? What's your thought?
It's a really challenging one, especially in the UAE, because the way the market's set up here, there are a lot of startup costs. When you're looking at the licensing, you have overheads you have to meet. So we always encourage startups, specifically in the UAE, whether it's through the incubators I'm advising or even the companies that we're funding, to focus on their MVP, get some market traction, really focus on that go-to-market strategy. Once you have your MVP, you are generating some sort of revenue, even if it's basic and you have visions and plans for your product from there, product or service. A whole new range of funding options open up to founders of these startups. For the startups that focus on iterating outside of the market, within the confines of their own boardroom, they're constantly relying on further rounds of equity to develop their product or service, further diluting their commercial interest as well as their control. By focusing on revenue generation, they can speak with groups like us and many others that can provide alternate funding. We don't touch equity, and there are many other groups that don't touch equity, whether it's through revenue acceleration, venture debt, and many other options. Having said that, once they do have that core product in place, we very much recommend absolutely seeing what else they can catch in the market, because when it comes to the later rounds of equity, it's very attractive for the investors to say, oh, there's so much more growth potential. Having said that, we don't look at it from a product development perspective, but very much from a revenue generation perspective. Different to the unicorn model in general, but very focused on enhancing the likelihood of success for startups in the UAE. Thank you.
Thank you. Pretty interesting. Vinay, have you worked in the emerging markets? And I've seen you have worked in Africa, which is one of your focus, and the MENA region or the GCC region. Can you just articulate, is there thinking difference when we are looking at the emerging markets or the developed world? Any thoughts on that?
So there are huge difference between emerging market and the developed world. One of the first thing that is highly different is on the innovation. You're gonna see a lot of companies in emerging market that are trying really to solve a need in their own country. There is a huge challenges, they try to solve it. That's why we saw the explosion of mobile money, we saw the explosion of fintech, because a lot of people were unbanked. There is a lot of difficulties that goes with that also, because there are more emerging ecosystem. You cannot go down a bar, like for example in the Valley, you will see everyone around you, a CTO, an investor, the entire ecosystem is there because it has been trained to be there. In a more emerging market, you don't have yet this ecosystem around you, so it's a bit harder also to pick basically the knowledge that you miss. It's a bit harder also to get the financing. You have a bit more difficulty and challenges to get the right partners with you and people that will understand your business idea. However, that creates also a lot of opportunities because you have less competition, you have product market fit most of the time that are used by people, and they also get a certain type of loyalty. If you start to provide basic services to people and those people start to depend on it basically, your startup become bulletproof. Bulletproof against decrease in funding, bulletproof against regulation, because people will need it. And therefore you have a product that can sustain a long life. And to come to the idea of a unicorn, at this point, right now in 2023, I don't dream about a unicorn, especially in Africa, because I don't know who is going to put $1 billion in cash to buy me. The largest exists right now at 700 million. So I prefer that someone build a long-term business that it doesn't chase the valuation, it doesn't change constantly the multiple, and it builds a product that has some proprietary assets, that has a huge set of users, that have a good product that someone outside of Africa, a Google, a BioNTech, will want to acquire, and he wants to acquire it also as a price that is attractive to him. And 500, 700 million is a quite good exit still.
Interesting. I wish many startups will have investors like you who are not chasing them for valuation, then for sustainability and customer retention. Interesting. Thank you. Andrew, help us think through the journey, what and when any startup should look at the IPO route. The startup should look at the IPO route, when they should move from a journey of pure play valuation to a market listing.
So what I usually tell a lot of our clients is you have to be strategic about your capital raise strategy in terms of not waiting till you need capital. So as you're building your company or you're even putting your plan together, it's something you want to start looking at the early stage. And the reason why I say this is you want to make sure that you're working with investors who are aligned with your long-term strategy. So if you're looking at doing an IPO at some point, you want to start with that conversation of the strategy from day one. So what does that mean? That means your investors should not only be aligned with your values, your missions, your objectives, but also your long-term goals. And one of the pitfalls you also want to avoid is not waiting to do this at the last minute, or maybe even later, or when you need capital. One of the things I've learned earlier in business is banks or investors only are willing to lend or give you capital when you don't need it. While at that early stage you're looking for capital, you just want to make sure that your investors that you're attracting are there for the long haul. They're there to work with you, but not only come in with capital, but also to bring in other values. And when I say that you're looking at 1 + 1, or what we call synergy, 1 + 1 must be 3, right? So you don't want just capital, you want also strategic input, experience, and other factors that will allow your business to grow beyond just an investment, but also strategy and other components that allow you to be a larger form of what you start with to where you end up as as an IPO, as a company going towards listing as an IPO?
Interesting. Thank you so much, Andrew. Dr. Asher, your passion, I believe, is the health tech, right? Which is what your academics and now your work looks talking about. Tell us, how do you see the opportunities and challenges, especially when you are creating a health tech enterprise to serve the non-conventional, especially when you're talking about the middle income or the informal workers, right? And creating a global enterprise out of it.
Thanks, Mohit, for moderating the session, and thank you, AIM, for hosting us. So I'd say I'd classify opportunities into three main categories. The first is digitally coordinated care. So many of you will be familiar with the phenomenon that health systems, globally speaking, are notoriously fragmented. There are, in terms of healthcare venues, there are hundreds of hospitals, clinics, pharmacies, labs in each country that don't speak to or communicate with each other. Data is siloed, they lack interoperability. And what that leads to is patients who have a mediocre to suboptimal customer journey. Duplication of tests, unnecessary diagnostics, second, third opinions, etc. So huge inefficiencies in the marketplace. So health tech ventures that can really curate that journey and digitally coordinate between these healthcare venues, I think will do extremely well. The second set of health tech ventures, or second area, is those health tech ventures that take advantage of demographic shifts. So if you look at the industrialized nations, you see a progressive aging of the population in Japan, in the EU, US, etc. And so health tech ventures that really focus on geriatric care and promoting continuity of care, again, will do extremely well. And finally, the third category is a category what we call the hybridization of healthcare, also known as the digitalization of healthcare or click and mortar. And so we see a number of health systems beginning to partner with telemedicine companies, digital health companies, again, to coordinate and create that seamless customer journey. Now, these opportunities bring challenges with them because, for example, healthcare is highly regulated. And because of that regulation, there are major concerns around data privacy, data security, data integrity. And of course, the data is highly sensitive. It's medical records, it's not car transport. So I think those are some of the major, that's certainly one major challenge, which is the interoperability and the sharing of data across these systems.
Interesting. This is a sector which has seen significant reforms in the last 2 to 3 years, and also, I mean, in my interaction, I've seen the regulatory authorities also opening up from their traditional mindset, the way they used to run the healthcare or the hospital network. So now, with this, in the interest of time, I just wanted to go an open script thought process. You all have worked with startups, unicorns, but you also have seen the ecosystem challenges, which is what, because of the way government operates. So I'll tell you from India example, while government runs Startup India, but they make sure that they stay out of Startup India's business, startups business. That's the rule of the thumb. For any initiative, we do not want government to be inside, right? So I'm going to just ask a very simple question to each of you, that if you were to give one advice to a startup or to an entrepreneur, what would that be? And if you were to give one advice to a government authority who is running the ecosystem, what would that be? I cannot go in a sequence. Anybody wants to go first, please jump in, and the others can follow. Please, yes?
Yeah, I can go first. So in terms of one startup advice, I will go for the fundraising process. When you contact an investor, you have 9 investors most probably that will say no, and 1 that will say maybe. Take that as a general rule. Even if someone say no, it doesn't mean you need to stop contacting him or stop reaching out to him. You need to, it's a process, fundraising. It doesn't happen from one day to another. You need to send newsletter, update about your company. When you approach that person, I think Andrew mentioned that, when you reapproach an investor, he almost need to know you since 6 months, 1 year, 3 months, but he needs to know you already in advance, and you need to create and build that partnership and collaboration with that person. So the advice to startup is, especially in those difficult times, always reach out to people and keep the contact open. As an example, I think I gave my 20 business cards to startup. I can bet that maybe 1 or 2 will send me a constant newsletter. And they increase their chance of success with me because I know them. On the government side, I think they need to have a proactive approach to regulation. Let's take the example of AI. With AI, you can do absolutely amazing things, but it's also like the nuclear power. You can create huge power plant and you can create the nuclear bomb. AI has the same potential. It can be as added value to the society as it can be unbeneficial. You go from Libya and they found weapons that were controlled by AI to automatically shoot. And I invested in an AI company that is able to detect cancer and detect malaria. Both of them are here, and regulation needs to be proactive to put certain boundaries inside innovation to control the new development and the new ideas.
Thank you. Very impressive. I have learned a lot. Please, Chirag. Yes.
So my thought on government is, don't worry about working with the government actively. Try to stay away as much as you can. And depending on country to country, this might differ, but for most Asian countries, it leads to more problems than solutions. The expectations and the way of dealing with the government is almost always very different on how you will deal with the corporates. So if you want to scale, you have to learn how to deal with the corporates and other startups. Even if you skip out the government, you can still become a unicorn, but you cannot become, it's very unlikely you can become a unicorn by working with the government and not working with the corporates. So if you have to solve a problem, solve for the corporates and startups, not for the government.
Thank you. Andrew.
I'll tie into what you said and what Vianney said. I think resilience is very important for entrepreneurs. Not quitting, not giving up, and not accepting no's. When someone says no or even a maybe, keep approaching them. Don't fall down on the first no you get. Keep going after your next opportunity. And for governments, I'll be short and sweet and say you don't want government too involved in the startup ecosystem, but creating an atmosphere and the landscape that allows startups and firms to thrive, I think is the best thing government can do. Not focus too much on legislating or getting involved with policy regarding startups, but just making sure that the landscape is there and the infrastructure is there to support startups. What does that mean? That means having organizations or entities in place, governmental entities in place that are there to help with fundraising, but also creating, I don't know, as my colleague has suggested he's doing, is also helping with mentorship, whether it's having a community of other business people who are there to mentor, entrepreneurs, but essentially don't get too involved with startups, but just create an atmosphere that allows them to thrive.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much. Yes, please.
I can, so on the,
Just bring mic closer to you.
okay. On the founder side, we look at the number one thing that we look at is they've got to be super, super passionate about their vision and idea. They've got to be hungry. Like, you've got to love what you're doing because it's incredibly tough. It's long hours, long days, 7 days a week. And if you get tired, you don't love your business, you don't love the idea, you'll never do well. So we look for that in the founders. And that hunger has to be there, that passion, and you can always tell if they're doing this for other reasons or their whole life is living and breathing the idea. So that's the founder. On the government side, I think like some of our colleagues here, it's streamline. That's the number one thing. It's all about speed at that stage. So the government needs to streamline everything to accelerate the business growth and then stay out of the way for everything else.
Speed is critical for the government. Thank
Yeah.
you. That's interesting. Yes, Dr. Asher, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. On the startup side, I'd say date before you jump in bed. especially with the government when it comes to prospective partnerships. And what I mean by that is that it's oftentimes, because of the scale of the government, some of these opportunities, these collaborative opportunities, seem very attractive. But the time that it takes, the energy it takes, focus away from building your company. And so that's been our experience as well. And so I think the Chirag's advice, stay away from the government, is actually pretty decent advice. On the government side, I'd say embrace early stage innovators. For some reason, governments have a tendency to work in silos and also only to take organizations that have already scaled their innovations as potential partners, and they tend to ignore early stage innovation, and I think that's to their detriment.
Thank you. Definitely, I'm taking a lot of notes. I'll go with Malachi, and the young one will have the last word. Please.
The most important thing has to be the resilience and passion, as all of the panelists have been saying. But if I can just add something else, which hasn't been the topic of this panel, but the principles of ESG are generally designed for much, much larger companies. But there's a reason why we talk about ESG in business. And if I can just jump straight to the governance point and how it's applied to startups, when we evaluate startups and we look at the strengths and weaknesses, governance is often, one of the things we go to is diversity in the board and how we can bring that in. That's just not practical when it comes to building a startup. You don't have the budget to have a dozen different perspectives contributing to all of your key decisions and strategic decisions. But there are other ways that you can access diverse opinions when it comes to decision making. You can be joining business communities. You can be having boards of advisors or clubs that you join where you or other business people in your community, perhaps they've faced similar challenges before, or perhaps you're facing the same challenges at the same time, and you can combine your brain power and problem solving just to come up with what the solution is. So focusing on governance at the startup level and all of the ESG factors, look outside of your own budget and your own startup to try and bring in these resources. On the governance, it's diversity of perspective, and that's joining other clubs, and applying the same sorts of principles across your entire business. Try and get as many perspectives as possible, but this only after the resilience and passion of the founder, of course, is number one. Thank you.
Thank you so much. John, your last words.
Yeah. So for the startups, two quick pieces of advice. Number one, never postpone. A wise person once told me that if you have a great idea, you should proceed with it immediately. And it is often the case that brilliant ideas that are created often by young people are not being realized or not even attempted. And point number two is focus on the user, because the user is often the best asset we can have, and the user is also the best source of competitive advantages and the so-called spiky thesis that you're able to obtain and then continuously refine your product. And in terms of the government, I would say treat early stage startups as a form of a public good, and maybe don't focus so much on the commercial success at the current level of GDP that we're at, but rather on developing funders and making sure that the ecosystem has more and more people from diverse sources, whether like tech or science or business, that are able to collaborate together and that are looking to proceed with something entrepreneurial, because in order to create economic growth in the long run, we'll need that bridge and we'll need more funders.
Thank you so much. I think we have 2 more minutes left. So if I just wanted to open the floor in case if any of our audience has any question for the panel. Okay, so with this, thank you so much, everyone, for your time, for all the preparations, meeting before. Thank you. So it was lovely interacting with you, making more friends, and getting a chance to moderate this panel. And thank you, AIM.
Thank you, Mohit.
Thank you, Mohit. Thank you, AIM. Thank you for the organization.